Back to 2019. So what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. Right along here with Ransom Godwin tonight, taking you through the next journey of our Earth. As we split dimension, as we can see, this last week freaked everybody out. We've had a couple freak out sessions here the last few years. Obviously COVID, number one, and this one, number two. So as we talk tonight, we might have to talk in code. You know how it is. A lot of the sensors are out there. You got to be very sensitivo about the things that you discuss, because it can only be one direction. If you talk about anything that's the opposite of the narrative, as we can see happening all across the protest landscapes of our cities. Protest the wrong direction, you're not allowed to do that. You're only allowed to protest the one direction. You know, things that are approved. You can't protest an unapproved segment. Now, come on, behave now. Where does us leave for energy prices for the winter coming in is a question. See, my whole thing about this is what you're seeing between the two tiny nations there is to draw Iran into a greater conflict along with Syria so they cannot deliver oil over to China. And by disrupting China's economy, cutting out maybe 1 million barrels of oil per day, you could stop the Shanghai Gold Exchange from moving forward, which is the center pin of the new BRICS aligned currency basket. So they need that gold pillar first before anything else can revolve and evolve off of it. They need to have the base. The base needs to be on the blockchain. It needs to be backed by gold to get that, zero risk asset as the base of that new trading system. Now, once that's in play, they can start to trade commodity for commodity. Hey, you know what? I need 1,000 tons of copper and you need 10,000 tons of wheat. I think we can trade that evenly 1 for 1. And we'll go outside the dollar. We don't even need dollars. We're just going to use commodity to settle. And if there's any overage or whatever, we can use the gold-backed reserve to make up the few $100,000 or the shipping fees, which would then be returned and redeemable in gold back on the blockchain again, back to the original holders. The whole thing for me is this is such a fake out. It is a head fake to draw in these other countries to make sure that China does not get their oil, because their economy is incredibly fragile right now. If you thought the American economy was fragile, you're not seeing anything fragile yet. Chinese economy is just like hanging on by a thread. So if you can disrupt that, boom, you could stop the BRICS-aligned currency and the de-dollarization campaign going across the planet. Maybe that's the way we'll start our program tonight. Ransom, thanks for joining me. I know you got tons of thoughts tonight.
Well, first off, I was thinking, we called it, or me specifically, like we were talking about the whole scenario, the October surprise, what would it be? And, we've been saying they're going to expand this war out. And I talked about last week that this month you'd see some triggers like 9/11. And, it wasn't a couple days later that we see exactly that. I have to take an American point of view to this. And what I see is two ethnic groups, half a world away, that's had a thousands of year dispute over the same piece of land. And I have no skin in it other than the fact that they, like you said, they use this to broaden the war. So let's be clear. We're talking about world war. I don't understand how you could think that we're not in the world war yet. I guess not enough casualties for people to wake up yet. But as it stands, we have a war in the Middle East. We have a war in Central Eurasia that's going to expand. Also, you can just tell geopolitically what the borders are on both sides of that war, and you can tell that the people in between it and next to it are most definitely going to join. And this is just like the plan we've been talking about for the last couple of years. They have to organize a reason to draw new lines on the map, to create a new system, a new map, a new resolution, a new treaty, whatever you want to call it. It's a new arrangement. It started in World War I, the League of Nations. It spread into World War II, and they got their United Nations. But that's not what they've ever wanted. They've always and only wanted a one world government. Now, obviously, there's several powers at play here that want to be at the head of the table of this new world order. But I'm going to follow the money. And the money says war is good for business. Plus, it's destabilizing. And, you know, we've been talking about this exact scenario kind of rolling out. I even specifically said, you know, in several shows already, talking about the Dome on the Rock, that is a iconic place for all three of the Abrahamic religions. You have the Prophet Muhammad ascending to heaven there. You have Jesus ascending after death there. And you have Solomon's temple. All three very important, you know, little place on the map. So they're going to fight over it. But more than that, they're going to use it as a tool to manipulate the emotions and pull the heartstrings of the entire world, and further dissect the world into a us versus them mentality until the end, because they have to have this. Otherwise, you know, no one will accept, okay, well, now we're all one people under the centralized system. We're all tracked. We're all traced. Everybody knows where we're at. You know, what's really weird to me is I've talked about on several shows also how Israel was upgrading their perimeter, putting AI to work. Some of the world's best AI and surveillance systems. Some of them, even on Gaza, in the Gaza area, have AI-controlled guns that shoot tear gas. They shoot other things. So this is kind of, in my opinion, you know, I immediately, when I started watching the news coverage, because I'm very biased against the mainstream media because of how many times I've caught them in bald-faced lies. Right away, I start hearing reports of atrocities, and, you know, I'm not going to say which ones they are, but I can tell you that it sounded like the same story that happened in Kuwait when babies were thrown out of the incubators on the floor. You know, later that turned out not to be the case. There was also the weapons of mass destruction that turned out not to be real either. And, you know, when we saw the president say that we're going to move, or it wasn't the president, but anyway, when they said they were going to move parts of the fleet into the Mediterranean in that little area there off the coast of, you know, the most ancient land of the Phoenicians. Matter of fact, two of the oldest sites, in my opinion, on Earth, and some of the most unexplainable sites on Earth are at those two locations in Lebanon, and Baalbek, and the other one in Jerusalem. And that's those giant stones that no one knows how anybody could have possibly even moved, cut, or put into place. And we're talking about the biggest cut stones in the world, to my knowledge. Giant. But anyway, so, you know, all of the world's powers have always been fighting over this area because, you know, I think about all of the stories of the gods and controlling mankind have come out of this area over the years. You know, so I have no skin in it. I'm more worried about improving my life and those around me and those that we talk to over the radio, preparing, because we know that there's a whole world of crazy people that have seemed to have lost sight of their humanity. But that's going to happen when you have many, many, many different groups that think they're more special than every other person on the planet, or their group's special, or their message is special. It really doesn't matter what it is. It's the group think that is dangerous, and has always been dangerous to mankind. We've always had this fight back and forth between civilization and groupthink. And every time we go down the road of groupthink, mass casualties follow. And there's no arguing that. So you don't have to pick a side in the fight. You can let it be what it is. It's a continuation of history. In my opinion, though, they're using this for a new reason, and that's the consolidation of all security forces around the world to hold hands to keep us safe, and unify the world under a one world technocratic dictatorship. And I believe the head of that will be given over to AI, because human beings are violent and have biases and, all of these other things. And these arguments will be used to take control away from the masses, the individual, the governments, and indeed the entire world, and hand it over to a regulated, programmed AI that's a top-down power, a technocratic system, a one-world government. Pick your flavor. The mark of the beast, you can say what you want, but you will have to have it if you want to buy or have your rations or stay inside the walls where it's safe from the terrorism and the catastrophes of global warming and, et cetera, et cetera. And besides that, we already seen their plan. They want to shove us all into giant cities, a.k.a. concentrations of people, somewhat like a camp, if a camp was in the middle of the woods, because they're going to take you out of the woods and put you in the camp. And they're doing this on a mass scale now. So we're talking millions and millions of people. And if you want to realize how that can happen, just look at the way that maps are recreated over time and how certain areas shrink and then disappear. This is something that's been happening everywhere in the world, including right here, and it'll continue to happen until it's a map with a unigovernment covering it. No borders, no walls, no USA at all. What's the saying? I don't know what it is, but that's the direction we're going. So are we just living in a simulation already? That's a good question. I know a lot of people are getting very biblical and diving into their religions, but I would warn people to keep a critical thinking mind when you're listening to other human beings spew their versions of, their interpretations of what needs to be done. And this is undoubtedly the first time since World War II that world leaders around the world of different on the different sides are calling for outright genocide of people. Now, I don't know about you, but it really sounds like a lot that's in line with the depopulation agenda of the world government, as a whole. And why would they care? If the people that run the world want to reduce the numbers of people, why would they care if, this uncivilized war action continues to spread into all of these seemingly nations that have already been weakened? And we've talked about this before on this show. What do you do when you want to beat a force or get rid of it? You starve them out, you cut the water, and then you just take it over. I don't know why that actually hasn't been done before, because it seems like they were waiting for a specific time to initiate this conflict. And then they're going to also use Friday the 13th. They love numerology. So that's the warning going out to the world that maybe some more triggers around the world might pop off tomorrow. And I don't have a dog in a fight. I'm like, I think there's a bunch of Texans that are just sitting around in their yard with their grass mowed, with their AR-15 thinking, you know what? That's a long ways away, but it could soon be moving to a border near you, as I've been paying attention as there's violence is increasing along our border. And if you know the geopolitical situation of Mexico, you know that they're friends with several different countries and allow them access into their, areas, and give them free passage and unmolested travel until they arrive here. And then seemingly are let in without too much verification of who they are. So that puts us in the same position as many other countries around the world where they have purposely balkanized each country around the world so that they have just enough kindling in different places to play with your heartstrings, like I said, and spark a riot, so to speak. And we've already been seeing that here in the U.S., over the past, I don't know, what is that? It's already 7 years since about 2016 when they started pulling off the Marxist riots right here in the U.S. And now we're going to see riots with a different slogan, but it's the same program. It's the same program that happened in 2014 in Ukraine, and now we're going to see it around the world. This is just a destabilization program, and I guarantee you that the powers that be, especially in the military-industrial complex, are rubbing their money fingers together because they know that they're going to cha-ching on this, and they're going to grow their influence and power, especially with the new world government, because somebody's going to have to supply said government with weapons to keep the ever-dwindling population in check during this reset. Back to you, Dave, with the weather.
Hey, could you do me a favor and say weapons of mass destruction with your very best Southern George Bush accent? Weapons of mass destruction.
You know what's so funny about his accent?
Can you give me a weapons of mass destruction best invitation to Georgie?
He does it pretty good for Connecticut, boy.
Yeah, man, I sent you a bunch of maps. Speaking of maps, I was working on a video today, and electric geology seems to explain that Temple Mount best. So if you look over into your Skype, I sent you about 4 or 5 maps. Now, one of them was done in the 1300s, the other one done around 1660, and the other one that has a more stylized version of what looked like a sailing map that shows a lot of Mediterranean is done like 15 or mid 1500s. So I got 3 different times in those maps. And what I did notice is the one in the 1600s, which says Jerusalem on it, the very long one that's white with lithograph looking, you can actually see the sides of the buildings is so gargantuan and so out of place. Like if you look at this map, and if you're looking in the foreground, you're looking at something on the bottom left that would be equivalent to, say, a French palace, the size of a French palace. But it is the tiniest little thing in front of all these other giant walls. And then when you look inside the city of Jerusalem, you see in the back and sort of in the center there, something that looks like 2 Roman Colosseums. And, the Colosseums, even of today, are quite giant when you look at open football stadiums, or even if you go to the Roman Colosseum, it's quite girthy, it's quite large. But then when you look at the buildings in front of it, I mean, it's just almost unexplainable how large these things are. And you were talking about Baalbek, because you go back up there, and these same buildings and stones you were referencing showed and do show the building before it was destroyed. That's still there from the 1300s, 1500s, and then 1600s, but now, boom, it's destroyed. Now, why is that? But you can see these walls around Jerusalem. And here's the thing, on the Temple Mount, this very much is electric geology, because today I was at the Thunderbolts project, and I was looking at a fair few videos from Andy Hall, because Andy and myself are going to be getting on an interview here. And if you're listening tonight, I sent you an email trying to set up a date for that. Because they always talk about these tunnels in labyrinths underneath Jerusalem. But if it was electrically sculpted, they wouldn't be dug. They would be natural chambers of what you consider like fulgurites. We're talking interplanetary lightning or something along that scale. That's so many, times, thousands of times larger, if not hundreds of thousands of times larger than the largest, loudest lightning you've ever seen in your entire life. Like literally uplifting part of the crust. And I found a few of the experiments that Billy Yelverton was running there when he was working with the Thunderbolts project on plasma discharge on a clay subsurface with moisture to show the buckling, the bubbling. And I kid you not, it is exactly the same as Jerusalem in these images that we're looking at, and the topography. periphery strikes, the periphery subsistence, as well as land raising. But if you're looking for a spot which would have been a spiritual magnet, as we see with ley lines, for those of you out there who understand the energetic, superhighways of our planet subsurface, this would have been a big one, because it's been like that for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It still remains like that today. So there's some energetic resonance that people have taken up residence in thousands of years. Prior to that, you're talking about the Canaanites, and you talked about some of this going back further in history. Well, we go back to pre-biblical times where this thing was inhabited, and walls and fortresses around that Temple Mount area. So some of these maps that I came across today when I was doing the research just blew my mind, because you're looking at in the very center of this black and white map from, say, I think it was 1665 was the date on this map. And you look at the base of the cliffs, and you can very clearly see people walking down there. So if you use the average of even a 5-foot tall person, let alone a 6-foot tall person, those cliffs that are even in front of the most gigantic temple with those large, 1,000-pound base stones on it, are at least 60 feet tall. And then if you look further in, you're looking at something that was literally built, and it looks almost like what we would see in London at the monarchy's residences. I mean, the girth of the building of this is just stupendous, and how they were able to move such large stones to build things that are even larger of today's girth, that we would have a difficult time. And even what you would consider the largest museum, like the Met Museum downtown up near Central Park in New York City, that's one of the smaller buildings that's in this map. And we are talking going way back in time. And off the black and white map from 1665, and then Ransom, if you pull over the red and the green map with the streets laid out, you'll still see the Temple Mount, and you will still see that incredibly gigantic structure using those same Baalbek 1,000-ton stones from the map from 1350. And then you see what looks like fortresses on the right, and those knobs and nodules. That's electrical scarring and discharge there from planetary lightning, or maybe not planetary lightning, but some sort of discharge from perhaps our sun. And whatever had happened, it was so many orders of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands times larger than something we're used to today to sculpt this area. And what you notice also is behind the Temple Mount, there's a series of aqueducts or bridges. So if you look at the Temple Mount and you know how large that is from the sideways photo, and you're looking at something built in the 1350s, that giant aqueduct behind there, that's baffling, absolutely baffling. And using these 1,000-ton stones to build what is in the foreground is still, stupendous to think about how far back. And that city's been completely laid out and gridded, and you got just the most massive structures. Like, who builds like that in the 1300s? They had castles, and I've been to a fair few castles because I love that kind of stuff. I'm no stranger to going to castles. That's actually one of the things I seek out when I go to different cities. If there's a chance to see castles, man, that's one of my things. I love the castles. And none of them are really that large that were built in the 1300s. Yeah, the castle walls around the cities, etc., that had some, they've worked hundreds and hundreds of years on it. I get it. But when you get into some of the castles that are out with the palaces the palace was more well guarded, which was built hundreds of years later. When you really go out to some of these castles, they're not as grandiose and large as you think they might be. Yet through history, there's been a couple big ones, but on average, what you consider a castle was large for the time, but in comparison to today's, they're not all that. They're usually on some sort of energy lines. That's why I like to go there, because I have found out just through my years of traveling that cathedrals and castles generally are on a ley line or an intersection of ley lines. And the big thing is, if you can get subsurface on those, like if you can get into the basements of the castles or the cathedrals, they usually have some sort of resonation chamber or they'll have some sort of ground level window that'll allow beams of light to shoot through. And I was in Guatemala one time, and I was with some dudes who knew how to read auras, but I didn't really understand that at the concept of reading an aura. I knew what an aura was, but I didn't have, like, I wasn't tuned in to see it, right? But these guys are like, dude, just hang here. Look when people walk down through the steps, the way the light's coming in through the bottom there, and I forget where we at in Antigua. I forget the name of the cathedral. But as people would walk down the staircase through that beam of light, I shit you not, their auras glowed at those moments they were walking through. And I was like, what in the heck did I just see? And from that point, I was just like, all right, well, there's something magical, and these temple areas have been mapped out. These cathedral areas have been mapped out for the energy resonance that they exude, that you can do something special on this spot. You know, in Ransom, and then that other map there, the Mediterranean Sea, the Ser Magnav. Now, part of this was a recreation from the Phoenicians. Since you mentioned them, I thought that would map up and match up, because I was working on this all day, these maps, to do my video. Now, one thing I also noticed, you're looking at the area of Palestine way back in the day, but if you look where Egypt is, where the Nile's coming out, there's a huge lake there. You see the Golan region, and then where, how are all these lakes and rivers in the same place that was supposedly desert for the last how many umpteen thousand years, and we have a huge network of river system over in Egypt there? Like, wait a second, the timelines that they're feeding us for the perceived desert conditions of this area aren't really jiving with the maps from the 1400s here. You know, they said, yeah, some 6,000 years ago, the mid-Holocene, that the mega lakes were drying out compared to, you know, coming out of the glaciation when some of the lakes were filling up. But, you know, if you follow traditional history, it's like everything had dried out, and we've been in a desert for 1,000 years. But I'm looking at this map just several hundred years ago. No, we weren't. You couldn't have that many flowing rivers, major flowing rivers on the maps, without having an enormous amount of water. So, I mean, just looking at some of these old maps just disproves history. And you can see Tripoli far up to the north of the map there. And, you know, I'd been out to Wadi Rum in the desert there, and that's down at the bottom of the Red Sea. The Mar Bripars. You know, so I'm looking at some of these things, and I know you're a fan of maps too, Ransom. I know you're a fan. So I thought that we could share with everybody there. And if I could talk, did you get that one last map? Well, you know what? I'll let you just respond to the maps before we go into the greater Israel maps out of Saudi Arabia and stuff. But, I mean, what are you seeing in these maps of these gigantic structures that are just unexplainable for the times that they were supposedly built? I mean, you look at that, the red and green one from the 1300s. Those things have been there an enormously long time, but you know, the size of them just is perplexing and unexplainable.
Yeah, this guy. I mean, if you know your history, for one, you know, Abraham came from Ur, so he was a Sumerian, undoubtedly, and then also another little weird confirmation. The Epic of Gilgamesh that we got through Plato, and then later we found out that it wasn't or at least it wasn't an original work of fiction, and that the book was actually one of the ancient world's books to Plato, and he rewrote it, and we got the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then come to find out, whoa, the Epic of Gilgamesh existed thousands of years before that. But one of the parts of the story there is Gilgamesh is trying to eat from the tree of life of the gods, and his mother tells him, you know, you can't do that here. You have to go to Baalbek and get in a shim, and then you could do that. And that's the whole adventure that you know, or at least part of the adventure that Gilgamesh is having, is trying to get to Baalbek so that he can live forever. You know, some weird stuff about this too is that I think the whole reason that you have Abraham going there is because he knew about the place, he knew about the giant stones, he knew about Egypt. I mean, it's obvious that if you lived in this area, you would have known about these other ancient cities. Also, thought to be mythological, but there it was when we found it. So we know these cities existed. We know there's a basis for this history. And for some reason, from the ancient world to now, we've been fighting over this little bit of real estate from the pyramids over to Jerusalem. And I believe, actually, all the way to Baalbek, if you want to count that in there. And I believe that's because there was ancient knowledge there. That's the only place, where they're cutting these giant stones. So we know for a fact some of the, let's call them engineers in their ancient history, they were trying to get back to that and claim some of that knowledge. Somehow, from then to now, it has become three of the world's biggest, groups of people that have certain beliefs, and they're going to keep fighting over it. But I do think that this is a triggered event here. And, you talk about the Phoenicians. We kind of know from looking at Hebrew where they got the language. I mean, it goes back to the Phoenician language. The alphabet is almost identical, part of it, especially the older versions of it. It's Phoenician. And if you've ever seen Phoenician artwork, it depicts them as Egyptians, all of the same type of imagery. So all of these groups of people know that something happened at these spots. What the question is, did they dig up whatever it was already? And I think that maybe they have, but not all of it. So if you start putting the pieces together of, all of the expeditions into this part of the world, you go back to the Crusades, right? They're trying to find something. They get there, they find something, they become unimaginably rich and powerful. And then the church, turns against them. Later, you have in World War II, people trying to dig up stuff in that same area. And then you fast forward to the post-2000s after the war there. We're digging up stuff in, Iraq. We're digging up stuff all over the place. This is the ancient world. There are secrets hidden in the sand, truths that they may not
Ransom,
want.
Could I throw a point there real quick, and I'll let you keep going. An enormous amount of the military bases when we were there for Gulf War I and Gulf War II, like the military bases were over those archaeological sites so they could get in there and dig unimpeded.
Absolutely. And then you had the Arab Spring in 2011. They're digging stuff up in the Giza Plateau. Nobody knows who, nobody knows what. They have machines out there. You could look, they have satellite photos even of the holes that just appeared there. But back up to 2003, there's a secret language going on between the leaders of the world. Saddam Hussein says he's the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. He starts putting up, imagery of Nebuchadnezzar and him, telling people the new era. And they just so happen to let some German and French archaeologists dig up about 250,000 new cuneiform tablets with God knows what on it that was being held in the Iraqi Museum of Natural History. And we didn't go for the oil fields. We didn't go for Saddam Hussein. We didn't try to take their military targets, and occupy those. What we did is we drove directly to the History Museum, and then they said that they robbed it. And shortly after that, ISIS, also funded by the United States. People still are trying to, deny that. But the truth is that every one of these little conflicts, you see the U.S. and Western money on one side of it, and above them the banks, obviously, because they play both sides to the middle. But they dug up all that stuff. It got stolen. And then right after that, all of a sudden you have an extremist group going around destroying some of the world's oldest Buddhas, the oldest cuneiform, Sumerian sites. They're blowing them up with ordinances that they got. So what we're seeing is the eradication of the proof of previous histories around the world, which will leave it all in the form of books and the internet at some point, because, the longest proof of human occupation anywhere is in stone. And we know that. We go around, we find it, Göbekli Tepe, other places. But I think these giant stones were there even before that. I think that at the end of the Younger Dryas, the megalithic culture, whoever that was working, cutting, moving these giant, unimaginably many tons, they're moving it around. They're not using ropes and pulleys and stuff like that. They had some other technology. I'm not blaming aliens, but we've been doing a lot of research on this because of other topics, and I figured out that, in my opinion, I think even the Great Pyramid of Giza is actually just a telephone. It's nothing more than a communications device. And the question is why would someone need to make a communication device of that size out of stone? It may be, in my opinion, because they didn't have, the kind of technology we have now. And there's some weird astronomy alignments, that you get in there, archaeoastronomy alignments in there, and it goes right over to a certain place. And this machine, which they've almost proven that it's that. I mean, there's an engineer called Christopher Dunn that demonstrated if you pour the compounds that are found in the shafts down the shafts again, like if we did it again, it would create hydrogen, which will bounce around in there. And if it was set up like it was in the days when the pyramid was new, the Nile River would go under it and pound on it, making this sonic vibration that would go up through the entire pyramid, causing piezoelectricity and some other effects. But the main ones in the chamber would be sulfuric or hydrochloric acid and zinc oxide. And when they mix, they make hydrogen. And then those hydrogen molecules will bounce around in the tiny shafts, creating X-ray. And that X-ray will beam out to a specific place in space that takes about 2.5 light years to get there. So they could actually talk to someone if they were waiting for the message there. Now, that may be all make-believe, but it's based on science that's going on there, and it kind of relates to what's going on now. Is there was a bunch of stuff in that area. And I think recently some archaeological discoveries in the form of cuneiform text led them to the locations of where all of these things were, and they dug it up. And now we're about to reset. And people in a few years after the Great Reset, after they change the internet, after they burn the books because they're too dangerous, you won't have any history. The statues are down, and people always wonder why they do that. Why do mobs always attack statues? It's to erase history. It's not for some kind of retribution or justice or anything like that. It's to erase history. And then when history's erased, you can repeat it because you can pull the same trick on people again because they have no historical context for that. This war is going to spread. And then will come in what me and you and every listener has to actually worry about is our bellies. And today, history's great, but it teaches us lessons. And the lesson I'm learning from both sides of this conflict that's going on, that both of them have been in situations where governments have put them in what's called a ghetto and then reduced the food, reduce the water, and we all know what happens at the end of that. So no matter which side you're rooting for, that's evil behavior, in my opinion. I mean, murdering people in mass or collateral damage, whatever country wants to call it. I mean, our country constantly does the same thing. We're not innocent over here as a country. We constantly kill millions of people with collateral damage, and that's what's going to be spreading around the world. And this is exactly what we talked about as the main trigger that's going to happen all over the world, where people need to realize that they're going to be in a situation where they may need to stock up on things, that things aren't going to be so rosy from here on out. We may not enter into the conflict directly, but it's going to have repercussions. And I think new conflicts going to sprout up right here on the border. And I mentioned people coming through and slipping through. Well, the new president is most likely going to be the first Jewish woman to ever be the president of Mexico. So her agendas might go a certain way or another way. Who knows? But it's about to get saucy. And like I said, we basically have been giving you a step-by-step up until this point. We even the last show we talked about these triggers, 9/11, bringing in world security, all of that. And here we are, David. It's getting a little scary at the pace that they're progressing at.
Yeah, and are you ready for the next shaking is the question I'm reading on the chat board over here. As ready as we can get. I mean, you got to think about through all of history itself. Has anybody ever truly been ready? They've been as ready as they could get, but at that point, it's going to be on-the-job training. Like you're going to have as much as you have around you in the community you have around you. And then from there, it's going to be a daily change, because I keep reading about energy prices for this winter that are going to be, well, substantially higher than normal now that the next pipeline has been disrupted. And Ransom, I sent you a bunch more images there while you were talking. I hope you can check those out and throw them on the screen. Some really good cuneiform text and a few other, Sumerian entities glowing with the sun. But this winter, how ready are you? Because this is coming in the beginning of winter. Now, you notice how cleverly it's done. If you're going to try to destroy or starve or depopulate, whatever you like to use those words as, didn't come in the springtime, where people could have grown their food and stayed off the system and had their gardens all summer and just gotten away from it and traded. And we're coming into winter, even here in East Tennessee. In another couple months, like mustard greens will grow slowly. That's it. There might be some radishes that'll stick around. Otherwise, this last little bit we're doing right now, we're replanting as we speak right now, the autumn garden, moving over into a few different types of lettuce, the emerald oak lettuce, the red velvet lettuce, mustard greens, like I say, kohlrabi, broccolini, any of these types of, crops that like to do in a little bit cooler weather. But if you're anywhere north of here, it's going to be too cold for you to grow, especially in Virginia. In another month or so, it's going to be too cold to have anything in the garden, in the ground. So think how clever this is done, too, where the whole northern hemisphere coming into the winter now cannot provide for itself. And if your electricity were to go down, then what? Could you even afford the prices of electricity? Because it looks like in Europe, the things where people were heating their home like one day a week and using candles to stay warm and things, the energy prices are poised to rise something like 3x in Europe because of now this extra pipeline that has just gone down. And heaven forbid the oil were to get cut off, there'd be more disruptions because of this conflict. You could be looking at 5x increasing in price for your energy for Europe, and it sure would affect the United States because we're so reliant on oil imports. So you have to think about your backup plan for what happens if the heat, let's say we're coming into January and the heat in your home goes down, there's a prolonged electrical outage. How do you prepare for that in your home in the middle of winter? Because if you tell me you're just going to wear a lot of blankets, you're going to have to be further south in Alabama or Mississippi or somewhere. Because where it's snowing in North Carolina and where it's snowing in Virginia, you can do that for a little bit of time. But otherwise, you're just going to eventually get too cold. How are you going to boil water to be able to cleanse yourself? If there's not enough electricity, what are your backups to get electricity and the heat for the winter? That's the whole thing, the heat for the winter. Because right on cue, this thing is coming in winter. And you mentioned sacred dates, Halloween's coming up as well. And if you know anything about the dark magicians, that is their day. So we're coming into something interesting on Friday the 13th, which is, again, if you're looking at Knights Templar and talking about old relics, monies, etc., found under the Temple Mount, Friday the 13th, you got to go back to, what was that, the 1200s, late 1200s when that happened. Significant day, very significant day from the exact same region about some of the same players that are still around, which is, spooky in itself to amplify on that day. But then when Halloween comes around, you could definitely look for another amplification. So camping stoves are a good one. Like I have a winter well stove and I have a yurt also. So if something were to come out and down and happen, I would pull out my yurt and get my winter well stove set up. That way I could cook on it. I could boil water on it. I would have heat inside the yurt. And any of you that know yurts, they get toasty warm inside. And even if it were snowing outside, it would stay warm in there the whole winter pretty much, unless it got down, 5 degrees Fahrenheit for a prolonged period of time or below zero. But again, how much wood would you have around? And are you allowed to burn wood in your area? Because now with all this, save the planet kind of thing, You're not even allowed to burn wood in many areas. And I just saw in the UK also they're outlawing any kind of wood stoves, burning of wood, usage of wood, even having a fireplace. They're going to have you brick it up. And if it's not bricked up, they won't be able to give a loan for the home. Because who was that? Neil McCoy Ward. Shout out, Neil. He did a video talking about currently in the UK, they won't give loans for homes that aren't up to some sort of, Agenda 2030, whatever it is, statutes that they're trying to bring in. It has to have a certain new energy rating on it with materials that would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars to even get an old home up to what you consider par. Like currently, if you were to buy it, sell it, yeah, you could stay warm in it. That's fine. But under the new guidelines for energy efficiency and these sort of things, there's no smart meters in those. There's no, everything has to be a metered, smart metered device in the home, including all the way down to the LED bulbs in the homes. The R factor ratings, if it doesn't meet the factor of a certain R rating for the home, they want you to strip it out and then reinstall all brand new, I don't know, whatever kind of fibers that are recycled from something else. You're not allowed to use the existing insulation that's in there between the walls and just add to it like normal people would do. You have to strip it completely out and then add this new polymer or sets of polymers that are rated. There's a whole bevy of different, it's like something like a 60-page book. Oh, here comes the C-130. You can hear it. There's been more air traffic here. I must say one thing, being outside a little more, there's more helicopter traffic. There's more heavies coming through also running down the valleys here. So I did notice that there's more military air traffic around our area for this last, say, few days. It's a noticeable. But they have a 60-page book just on insulations, window trimmings, door trimmings, what is allowed to be used as a trim, like the traditional things that you might go buy in a Home Depot currently don't meet the standard. So you're not even allowed to buy that to install it in your house. But they're not going to allow you to get a loan or a note on your house until everything in your house has been replaced. So any new homes that are going to be sold in the UK after this year have to meet this new standard of energy efficiency based on these 2030 goals. So that's another one to look at. And that the whole thing about the reason I brought that up is one of the mandatory things is if you have an old fireplace in your home, it has to be bricked up completely. And when I say completely, I'm not talking about just bricking in the front of it so later somebody with a sledgehammer could bust it down and use it again. It has to be filled completely with concrete after it's bricked to be 100% unusable, 100% unsalvageable before that will pass the standard for it to be able to be sold. And that will be in addition to everything else that has to be replaced in the home. Like the ridiculous part of it is to get a lot of these homes, I'm going to say a lion's share of the homes in the UK up to the new 2030 energy efficiency, the upgrades themselves are going to cost more than the home price itself, if not double the amount of the home price itself. And then the whole thing about going into the homeowners, person who wants to buy, the landlords, and these sort of things. In the future, it looks like they're going to have to bulldoze them to the ground and build them from the ground up with an entirely new 2030 efficiency guideline built from the ground up with everything smart metered, everything smart insulated. They'll have control of your doors, the door locks. They don't want you to use keys anymore. It's going to be a door lock keyed system that's electronic. So again, maybe they'll lock you out of your house if your social credit score drops, or again, if you're caught at a protest that you shouldn't be, then you'll be denied access back into your home. Everything has to be on the smart. All your refrigerators, even things as innocuous as a blender, have to be a smart blender. All your refrigerators have to be smart devices. Everything has to be controlled. Your thermostats, everything has to be able to be controlled from outside your home by an organization yet unknown. Now, currently, they're talking about the Met Office and the electrical that's already established there. So the Met Office would be able to control your thermostat based on the forecasts. And if it gets too cold, they're going to, limit your power. If it gets too hot, they're going to limit your power. But, you're talking about the Met Office. That's like a weather forecasting bureau to be able to control your thermostat of your home. Like, this is the kind of bizarro world we're heading into. Now, the only way they can possibly get you there is through war, to destroy everything so there is no grid left. So there is complete chaos where when you return to your home, as we've seen every chapter of war history, you flee with your family. You take your most valuable things with you and you flee. Now, when you come back from this particular thing on a global, whatever it turns out to be, will they even allow you back in your homes, or will that be now off-limit zones? So these are the things that I look at out into the future thinking, all right, could they scare people with a couple low-level dirty bombs or small nukes, which we've talked about many a time before? Oh, that area is completely off-limits. You can't go back there anymore. And just take complete areas and swaths of our planet that's now habited to inhabitable, just like they did with Chernobyl. But imagine it, and I could imagine most of it being farm country, where they won't allow individuals to get out here. But if it's any indication of where we are heading, and the reason they're going to use this war also for energy efficiency, energy inefficiency and control of your home, and how a bank can lend to you to get a home or refinance it. This is the thing, that this is where I really see it. Refinancing your home based on the same scores that are being put forth now, but it only affects new mortgages. What happens when they reset the system to a new central bank digital currency system and your mortgage gets reset? You're going to have to abide by the same system for that to be reset into the new mortgage system. I could not even imagine 1% that they wouldn't require the same 2030 sustainability agenda goals to be built into the home for them to even allow you to continue your mortgage in the new system. But of course, they'll lend you the money to upgrade your home at the higher interest rate, because then your mortgage rate would be 3 times higher. And if you can't afford that, then what? So this is all about depopulation and removal of people off of the land and out of your homes. And you can only do it one way. It's going to involve energy and it's going to involve money. And all of those will be affected and are beginning to be affected right now. Just one last thing, Ransom. Today's video I was working on, it shows only 17 days of strategic petroleum reserve left in the United States. That's all we have left. Once that runs out, then we are going to get into what? Because as soon as this war kicks off to a higher degree than it is, because you just saw Israel bombing the runways in Damascus and bombing the runways in Aleppo, in Syria, no less. When the Iranian diplomats were coming to fly to Damascus, Israel jumped in front and wrecked those runways to the point they're unusable. They have to be completely rebuilt. So as you speak right now, Damascus and Aleppo no longer have functional airports. They actually had to turn around and fly back to Iran. So we can see this thing's already expanding well beyond. Lebanon says they're joining in, so that's a dual front. In Syria, that'll be a tri-front. And if Iran comes in, that'll be a 4-fronted war. And America has 4 aircraft carrier groups over there. And they're all in like a really tiny, very small postage stamp area. And you got ones running up the Red Sea area. You got them over in the Persian Gulf right there. You got 2 in the Mediterranean Sea. And most of these hypersonic missiles are multi-thousand mile range. And they're so supersonic. Now, the only way I could see even our Vulcan phalanx systems and all these kind of, top secret things that are no names for the public to understand about our protection off the carriers and different types of battle groups. Those hypersonic missiles, sunburn missiles, Onyx systems, that's just going to shatter and just sink our fleets. Unless they have something above our heads, laser-based space systems that we just don't understand that are so top secret, our carrier groups are going to get sunk over there. And again, would that be an on-purpose thing, putting the sitting duck in the bathtub? Because that really is what it seems like. Like, how close is that carrier group going to get to the shores off of Israel and Gaza? Because, you know, Lebanon has those Onyx missile systems, and that has about 120-mile range, and that can take out a carrier. So I don't know, Ransom, we're going to go on the break here in a second, but I know you'll have something to respond to when we come back for that.
USS Liberty.
Yeah, right. And wouldn't that be apropos that would be the ship that got, that was, so apropos, it's the Liberty, and that's what got, was being shot up at that time to try to draw us in.
I don't
At least
think
somebody with common sense out there got out on the deck, and, you know, maybe you want to go into that story when we come back, because another false flag of our own ships being attacked by the Israeli Air
allegedly.
Force.
In the ancient world, gold was magical. Gold was a manifestation of the sacred, and objects fashioned from it were a means of connecting with a supernatural world. Far from passive deposits of wealth, gold was sacred. It was greatly prized in cult. Objects made of gold were active agents in an ongoing engagement with powerful forces. The Inca used gold to make ritual objects, combinations of gold and silver and gold and copper, called tumbaga. Wearing gold jewelry was a sign of a person's wealth and power. For the Inca, gold was also the blood of Viracocha, their sun god. For the Mayan people and many others in ancient America, gold was part of a complex symbolic system. Gold is mentioned in Greek mythology for examples as varied as King Midas, the golden fleece stolen by Jason, who possessed the power of resurrection, through to the golden apples of Hesperides. The golden apples were guarded by the 100-headed dragon Ladon. The dragon conferred immortality on whoever ate them. Over the past 5,000 years, from the Egyptian pharaohs and the merchants of 14th century Venice to world governments in the space age, man has treasured gold for its utility and value during times of both prosperity and disparity. Through the rise and fall of great dynasties and civilizations, gold has maintained its purchasing power as a reliable store of value for millennia. Gold has been used as money since 560 BC, when King Croesus of Lydia created a gold coin in his own image. Ever since, it has continued to increase its long-term value and remains the world's most universally accepted form of money. Today, the demand for gold continues to flourish globally. History proves that fiat paper money is designed to go to zero through inflation, whereas gold has intrinsic value in which it maintains forever. Paper money is a debt instrument. Gold is an asset of wealth in its own right. It does not depend upon any governments, corporations, or individuals' promise to repay. ITM Trading has spent the last 27 plus years developing a team of expert researchers and analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn or currency collapse. Schedule your free gold and silver strategy call 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422, or go to learn.itmtrading.com/MIAC. And keep watching Mountain High Time and Mini Ice Age Conversations if you know what's good for you.
Releasing the show notes from our programs, just bullet point list of what we talked about so you can start the conversation with others. or do a deep dive in your own research, head over to oilseedcrops.org. In the nav bar, you'll see MIAC radio show. Click there, put your email, and we'll get that out to you on a weekly. And please remember, with YouTube's algorithm running today, like, subscribe, and click that bell to get notified.
Cloned food, edited food, fake food, and unhealthy foods of all kinds. That's not what Mama was cooking when you were a little bambino. You want to know what's in your food. I know you do. Heaven's Harvest has Protein Booster Kit is the bolster of your daily emergency meal plan. Containing only essential proteins, beef, chicken, and eggs, stock up on vital amino acids and nutrients required to thrive in all situations. They got the fruits and vegetable buckets, the breakfast bucket kits, and for a You Health Food Nuts, they got an organics kit. Now that's knowing what's in your food. They even got the heirloom seed kit so you can plant your own food. Heaven's Harvest Heirloom Vegetable Seed Kit is a simple way to start storing seeds safely. Not sure what varieties are hardy, easy growers, which thrive and taste the best. They have taken the guesswork and time out of the process of seed saving. Now you know what's in your food because you grew it. Go to heavensharvest.com. You can save 15% at the checkout with code ADAPT.
And we're back, at least on the video streaming services and back on the radio too. I don't know why they haven't been playing the middle break there, but kind of caught us off guard the last couple nights. But I was actually prepared this time in paying attention to the timer there. Would it be David? Oh, I thought I heard him coming back.
Yeah, Groovedelic. And yeah, I really like the gold history lesson on that because, as was stated in there, as you pointed out, it's the most accepted store of value in money across the planet. I don't care where you go or what place you are on the entire planet. You can put that gold on a desk somewhere, and of every single nation on the planet, somebody will accept that. Every single nation. There's not a single nation on the planet where there's no person that will accept gold. That's impossible. It is 100% accepted in 100% of the nations across our planet. And it's been like that for thousands and thousands of years. So what is it about the gold-backed currency that the U.S. is trying to prevent being formed and the de-dollarization to continue? You know, what is it going to be if a carrier gets sunk, if a U.S. carrier gets sunk of one of the four carrier groups? I mean, what's going to happen? Like, what kind of optics can you put on that? I mean, what kind of optics are they going to express to the American public? Like, hey, by the way, we put the four carrier groups way too close to the shore, so anybody with shore-based weapons was able to wipe out at least one of the carrier groups and take down a bunch of troop carriers with that and the support ships, and they took out a couple destroyers and, whatever. So, I mean, think about the optics that could put on. Imagine a carrier group or just a carrier and a couple of support ships getting sunk. Man. That would be like Pearl Harbor 2.0-ish, maybe 3.0 now because we had 9/11. Not sure.
I don't know, but if somebody does do something to one of those U.S. ships over there, I'm sure the cameras will be off. Yeah, that always seems to happen for some reason. There's something, what I'm starting to think it might be extraterrestrials, because every single time a major event happens to humanity like in recent times, the cameras, they just don't work. They turn off. And, everybody that's ever been abducted knows you can set up TVs and cameras and stuff. You're never going to catch nothing on it. Like they traveled across the stars. You don't think they know that you set up your GoPro? No, I'm just kidding. I was being facetious, obviously. But it does seem that cameras aren't what they used to be. And, the security's just not what it used to be. And over again, it seems like the governments around the world, whether it be here or overseas, prove to us again and again that the only person that's going to help you is you. That's it. You're the only person that's going to defend yourself. You're the only person that's going to feed yourself. You're the only person that's going to care about where you're at. If something happens, you and your family, that's it. Unless we change that, we've talked a lot about setting up communities, because we don't have to live that way. That's just the way human beings seem to be forced into living for at least the past 10,000 years. It seems like no matter what, no matter which point they get, for one reason or another, it gets knocked down. And it's funny, you sent me that depiction of the Tower of Babel. Because indeed we're at that point again in history, just like described there, whether or not that, specifically happened or it was like a parable or a story about something else and it got turned into that story. Either way, the message in it, that mankind kind of became arrogant in its ways and did all kinds of vile things. But they were technologically advanced, weren't they? They built that giant tower, and then they had to get put back down and separated into languages. And I think it's ironic that, knowing history the way I do in the present makes me question history of the past. So, in other words, if you know that the voices of the current empire tell you one thing and then it turns out not to be true, it's very possible the same thing happened in the past. And indeed, there's sayings about that. Victors write the history. Terrorists are the losers and generals are the winners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The question is in the next phase of things, what will we and our descendants come out to be in this part of the world? Will we opt out of this annihilation of ourselves? Because, the elite have plans, but they really can't do it without the population throwing themselves at the machine like lemmings, because that's what happens. It's always the latest cause. You can see that in reflection on social media. Most of the people that have an opinion about the area have no idea about the geopolitical history of the area, the parties involved, the tricks, the deceptions, the really horrible things that have been done in all sides of any conflict. I mean, you cannot pick a conflict in history where you can say that one side or the others was the good guys. Because when the good guys get in power, they seem to do the same thing as the bad guys do. So it's kind of hard to distinguish that. But what they do show you is that no one's going to help you but you. Now, I was watching those videos of Israel, and you could pick a side. I don't care what side you are. What I saw was armed people going around shooting unarmed, innocent people. So I don't care which direction that happens. I don't care if there's a bunch of Israelis going into Gaza and killing a bunch of innocent people. I don't care. I don't care who's doing it. I don't care if it was Adolf Hitler or Mao from China or Stalin from Russia or somebody, with the American flag behind them draped in it. It doesn't matter who's doing it. What matters is what I saw were people that were not defending themselves. That's the point that I saw. You saw a bunch of, you can call them innocent civilians. You can think that they're not innocent, whatever you want to think. But that's regardless of the fact that they were unarmed and they couldn't protect their families. And, you hear all these politicians in the U.S. Why would you need an AR-15? Well, that's why. That's exactly why. And guess what? If you live along the border of the United States, you're not safe from that happening. Matter of fact, you're not safe from that happening living in any city in the United States or the Western world, because there are people that are from here and from other places, both, that go crazy. And I believe that people that are willing to kill other people in any any name of other than self-defense or the defense of the innocent is people that are crazy. They have lost their minds, and I don't care who gave the instruction, people in their head because they're schizophrenic, or their belief in somebody or something that lived a long time ago, and they continue to believe what people 10,000 years ago were doing. Because if you really think about it, everything in the design of what's going on now is little groups, ethnicities, histories that the elite care nothing about. They don't care about that. They just know that they can manipulate the masses with it. And, you know, when you study World War II, you know that it was coming before it started happening. And there were a lot of things done under the name of something else that was to further an agenda that was way above all the country nations that the populace read about or took sides to. I equate it basically to the NFL. You have all of these, you got the two different divisions, you got all of the teams and owners and, the entire industry that supports it with the snacks and the uniforms. And they play off something that's so simple in human psychology, which is tribalism. And we've proven over and over again with, scientific experiments, if you give one person a uniform and the other person a uniform, they are going to start behaving in tune with that uniform. So it doesn't matter what it is or what the purpose was at the beginning, it does alter the perception of the individual. So the lesson learned is you better start growing food and taking your own life serious and your own infrastructure, your own logistics, and steer your own future, because I don't believe these people can steer our future unless we let them. And I think let that be a lesson to the entire world, that the Second Amendment works not only here in the U.S., but it should work for you wherever you live, because my belief system is in that document where it says that my creator gave me the right to defend myself. So whoever your creator is, I'm sure he agrees that you should defend yourself.
Yeah, they sure do want us to hand over our sovereignty, don't they? Again, this could be a push in addition to the central bank digital currencies to try to get truly a one world government saying, well, yeah, AI has to run this. We can't let this happen again. Never again in history. How many times have we heard never again in history, again and again and again and again? These whole things, it's such a fallacy. It's a hoax. It's a smoke and mirror of never again. Well, until it's good for our side, and then we can do it again.
One point before you go on, they're putting in the news, people are saying the term, the war to end all wars. How short memory we have. Exactly what you're saying. The same phrase, man. Give me a break.
Yeah, right. Rinse and repeat. But, to your point of even going back 10,000 years and something being into control, it's like, I don't know, maybe a remnant of that previous civilization got dragged through the Younger Dryas and kept itself intact enough and technologically advanced enough to then control those that survived the Younger Dryas and tried to reform into these communities, these civilizations and societies of some 10 or 12,000 years ago, because it does seem like the same source of force, life force, has always had a thumb on humanity to extract energies from it. Now, at this current phase we sit, the extraction of energy is extraction of your life force using money. But I'm wondering what it was like before there was fiat currencies. We could go back to serfdom, and the extraction of your life energy was producing something for a king or a queen or a monarch. And that's easily transferable back to the Roman era, the Greek era, the Phoenician era, using slaves on ships, etc. They're stealing your life force for something. Now, if we go back pre-Sumerian, it's difficult to find when that control mechanism started itself. Because if you do follow back pre-Younger Dryas, which is around 12,500 years prior, there are quite a few stories of civilizations 30,000 years ago, 80,000 years ago. But you also have to ask yourself, was that the operation of farming the human energy domain as well 30,000 years ago? And has it always been like that? And has this type of energy farming of the human, has this been around for hundreds of thousands of years? And we go through these cycles of the end of all, and then we come to this apex where there is one global civilization, one global governance structure. And then what happens? Do we get a large cataclysm again where it wipes us back? And they know it's a cycle, although they don't share with the general public. And when I say they, I'm talking about these same power brokers, the ones that have been around for thousands of years, still in control. Understanding the cycles here, they take it as far as they can, each successive, Goldilocks zone that allows humanity to expand to the reaches that we've moved around our planet. And I really just think, something got dragged through the Younger Dryas from the previous civilization that was able to maintain a control structure and still farm humanity for its energy and its life force. Now, currently, I see two different types of life force manipulation. One of them is keeping us in a fear base and a low resonant vibration to actually feed off of that vibratory energy coming off of humans in a real physical sense. And I really, no BS assessment, like they're really milking that and feeding off of that. And this global war, if it does create that type of vibratory pattern, can you, maybe not myself and maybe not you, Ransom, or those out there listening, but can you imagine 5 billion or 6 billion people vibrating at extreme fear? Because sharks can sense these types of things. Animals, predators can sense these types of things. So I'm wondering interdimensionally what would also sense that and come here to what would be considered the world's largest feeding trough. But at the same time, the using and stealing of life force energies by the use of money. Like once it takes on a central bank digital currency type of format, at what point then? Because then at that, I really think they could stimulate and absolutely cause even the most sane person to go insane if you're going to lose your ability to enter your home in the middle of winter when you're freezing, to turn off every power device, including your heating, in the middle of winter. So you couldn't even cook. You had no heat. You had no hot water. To make all of your money disappear that you worked for, like the type of hopelessness and despair that could be put onto even the average strong person. I mean, at that point, farming a human for their energies takes on a completely different sort of demonic realm to it, where the physiology is controlled, the mind is controlled, and how that person is slaved out and sold to others is controlled. And when I say that, I'm talking about you're sold to another company. You're sold to a corporation. I mean, today doesn't have the chains and you're not, whipped on your back. Oh, you're unemployed. Oh, we're going to have to lay you off. You can go work over here. You can change the city. They didn't have to ship you to a different city in a train car or a boat across an ocean. You chose to go there yourself. You look at the way it's so cleverly disguised today, but who owns most of humanity? The corporations that employ a large majority of humanity across the planet are the owners of these people. They have to do what you say. You have to be there at a certain time. If you don't, you're penalized. You have to restrict your speech. You have to follow certain sets of norms. You can't step outside those, or the basic life needs will be removed from you. No different than putting you in bars under the castle and letting you sit there. No food, At some point, you're going to start eating from a trash can, just like when they would put rotten food down in the dungeons. People would gobble it up. No different. It's just about the perception of it, because I think the vibrational frequency allows us to see through these things like that. You know, now is it acceptable to put people in cages under the castles again? Is that just suddenly okay today? I mean, just the 180-degree flip on what was considered normal or barbaric is just astonishing in a single day or week. Like a thing I hear out of people's mouths now, I'm just like, huh? What? That's impossible. You just said that? No, you're kidding me, right? But the way it's been spun now, the most barbaric acts are considered, yes, absolutely go do that. But again, take us back to World War II, where never again and again, and then it was, what was it, in the Sudan, and then how many times have we seen these atrocities occur across the planet? And how many times has it happened in Africa alone, where they said never again, again and again and again? The Hutus and the Tutsis. I mean, well, sheesh. How many warlords are running around Africa just absolutely decimating everybody? The Sudan was none too kind to anybody. The famines that have run through that place, the warlords that controlled it, the destruction of humanity that's occurred across there, and nobody's blinked an eye. They say, oh, no, you shouldn't do that to another human. You shouldn't do it. But now it's suddenly like, yeah, do that to another human. And people cheering for global governance and people cheering to be enslaved further and further. It's just astonishing how humanity is being manipulated at this point. I don't know if it's the changing magnetic fields that we're going through. There was an amplification, by the way. Let me send you this chart here. I sent you a fair few other photos, you know, during that last break. So let me send you this one here. As we go through until October 24th of 2024, so we have about another year of this or so. The magnetic field's intensifying with the gas giants moving into their squares, which allows a greater potentiality of magnetism, electromagnetism to move and be concentrated or flow in different facets through our solar system. Now, Ransom, this is a geocentric view where our planet sat on the 7th, that same day that everything kicked off on Friday and Saturday. So if you notice, the center of the magnetic field of the sun behind us, along with Mars and Venus behind us, and directly in front of us, the squaring field, not at the apex, which we'll see about another year and 3 weeks from now. But as the magnetic field, as we understood it amplifying, we were in the center of that on the 7th when all of this started, which is incredible for me to think about. Because to manipulate humanity during a change of magnetic field state means, for me, if they did it right now and that magnetic field is still very weak in comparison to where it will be, then what did we just get pulled on us, and what will be pulled on us again as we get closer to October of 2024? See, that is pretty much the center of us in the new evolving magnetic field at the moment, was on the 7th of this month, a few days back. And magically, or maybe it was using magic, everything kicked off. Now, again, using energies and magic and knowing how the human resonance field of the brain would be affected by this evolving magnetic field. And I would ask and challenge everybody out there, in the last 7 days, how have you felt? Has your body been physically off? Because I know a lot of people around Knoxville are saying they've had some kind of, like respiratory gunk. It's not COVID, it's not the flu, it's just like a gunk. It's almost like there's too much pollen in the air. I've heard a lot of people say, nah, it's kind of just, maybe it's too dusty, it's too dry, whatever. How are you feeling mentally? Have you had lack of energy? Have you been depressed? Have you been happy? Have you been extremely energetic? I mean, take a notice in the last 7 days, how has your body and your mind been affected that you noticed a change in your normal waking state that's been a little bit different, a little bit off? Because now we're pulling back out of that field. We're not going to be nearly as centered as we were back on the 7th, just a few days back. The planets are moving, we're moving, so we're not in that center range anymore. It's literally that quick. So as we come into October 23rd and 24th of 2024, we're going to rock through that magnetic field in like a 2-day event. And whatever occurs during that time is going to be pinpointed and laser projected into those 2 days. So again, I'm going to ask everybody out there, how have you felt this last week? And if you say you felt strange or different, your body's been behaving differently, your mind's been behaving differently, you've been thinking different thoughts, you have no motivation, some extra motive, whatever, that's directly because of that magnetic field amplification we just rolled through. So, if you're looking for causes, and then you see this gigantic world event occur, I'm starting to put 2 and 2 together, and I don't think it's 2 plus 2. I think it's 2 times 2 times 2, and we're suddenly getting into exponential math here. But somebody understood the magic. They understood the magic of the human resonance field being bent during this time. And it'll be used against us once more or twice more, especially when we come on the backside of that, somewhere around April of next year. We will encounter the same exact thing, but the Earth will be behind the sun, so everything will be pulling in one single direction. And we'll experience that twice more. We're going to go through this cycle once more on each. In front of this sandwich between the sun and the gas giants, we're going to experience that once more at its apex. But also, as the Earth swings around in its orbit on the other side of the sun, where that squaring field will be even more squared up as we come in through April. We'll rock through that. Sun will be on the Earth will be on the other side of the sun. And then as we go through October 2024, we'll come back out around and we'll be on the backside of the sun, April of 2025. We're going to go through this twice more. So whatever's happening now, you can anticipate that those same energies known by the magicians will be used at least 2 times more against humanity. And I'll leave it there, man, because I know you can respond to a lot of that.
Yeah, I was showing people this article from the Wall Street Journal that basically talks about what we talk about all the time, and it's showing one of these giant flares coming off the sun, which is, puts in perspective. You have all of this stuff going on the ground down here, and the sun's doing its thing and the planets are doing their things. And we know some of these people are, basically worshiping the planets. I mean, there's a lot of research done on how most of the Abrahamic religions are related to astrology and worshiping different celestial gods and goddesses that have nothing to do with the religion. That's why they use terms like Isis and things like that. And Jordan Maxwell famously said that you need to pay attention to the world plan. And this was his opinion, not mine, but he said that the reason that they put together Israel is because it's the name of 3 different gods. It's Isis, Ra, and El. El being the what people would now know of as Jehovah in the Bible. They mixed that name and they incorporated all of the older religions at the time. Now, when you look at the sun,
would that be Enlil? Would that roll back even into Sumerian back to Enlil then?
Almost undoubtedly that's directly connected, considering that most of the first Genesis tales in the Bible are direct rewrites of Sumerian tales about floods and how we got reset and all kinds of other things like that. But my point kind of is look at the sun, which is agreed upon by almost anybody with a brain, is the most likely candidate to put us in a new catastrophe on Earth, except for maybe, a Krakatoa size explosion sound around the world, which you see here. It's the noise circled the Earth at least, 3 times or 4 times, excuse me. It was heard in over 50 different locations around the globe. So something like this is actually what we should be worrying about as a civilization, as a group of human beings. And then just to put things in perspective, and we talk about how long these things have been going on. Here's an article from the Smithsonian. These are 200,000-year-old handprints and footprints of children that were playing on the Tibetan Plateau 200,000 years ago. Now, most likely these are Denisovan or Neanderthal or a mix of those, or maybe even an unknown person. It could even be Homo sapien or Cro-Magnon, basically the same thing. However, it puts into perspective that 196,000 years ago, before the Bible, before those religions, right? 196,000 years ago, there were people on the Tibetan plateau there living their life out. Their kids were playing, they were eating, and they were living, and they believed in something then, and they had their own dramas and journeys and adventures and epics back then. 200,000 years ago. These are human beings we're talking about, and there's no geneticist worth their salt that claims that Denisovan or Neanderthal were that far away from Cro-Magnon. Matter of fact, Cro-Magnon doesn't really appear until about 40,000 years ago. Nobody knows how or where or why. They give you these fairy tales about out of Africa, and then they admit things like this, which are different human beings living 200,000 years ago, just doing their thing out there. They admit there's now apes in Europe. There's chisel marks on animals in the La Brea tar pit that goes back way behind. We got 30,000-year-old pendants in South America. None of the history you've been told is correct, and it's been a regurgitated, reset version of that history. And every 2,000 years or so, it seems like they decide, you know what, this ain't working out like we want it to, so they reset it. This drama has been playing out for God knows how many cycles already on this earth amongst human beings. Now, do you believe that Cro-Magnon just pops up 40,000 years ago, or do you think he might have been on some of the land that was exposed prior to the Younger Dryas, like all of that land that's 400 feet under the ocean now, where people were probably living and had villages and civilizations, technologies we'll never even know about. And then, we get into modern times, and they're trying to include people of this era in disputes over land rights or promises to land that stretch back about 8,000 years ago in the city of Ur, where they first had these, or at least we first know of these little contracts about who owns what. And, they had land contracts. So all the way 8,000 years ago, they had the idea of ownership of land. And we've been fighting back and forth with governments for at least that long on the idea of private property. But now we get to the future where people are still having a land dispute from their great ancestors dispute over the land. And I know that some people are religious, and I'm not saying that the religious events of the last 5,000 years did or didn't happen. I'm just saying that obviously things were going on for a long time before that. Epics, adventures, the whole thing. What do you think about that? Because it really puts man in perspective. We've been reset so many times. And like I said, any minute, any year, maybe it's 100 years from now, maybe it's next year, the sun's just going to burp a big burp out our way, and it's going to reset everything, whether we like it or not. And this is the most likely thing. And matter of fact, where we are, and it makes me wonder, and, I'm not a scientist or anything, but, I have this concept of magnetics where positives and negatives or charges of different kinds try to balance themselves if they can. So if you got a sun that's, going back into what, a minimum, is the solar maximum over or not? I'm not sure, but think about that. When you're looking at this picture of these planets with all their charges on one side of the solar system, it kind of makes me think of like a plug, like a positive and negative. And, you might just have an arc. The problem of that is, as you can see from this Earth-centric map, is that we are in between the positive and negative forces there. That's just a theory of mine. Obviously I'm not a scientist, so I don't know all the ins and outs about charges and the electrical relationship between the planets and the sun. But regardless of that, you can see here on this graphic that they're showing right here. This is just a flare that popped off the sun, and they got this imagery here. But this happens all the time, but most of the time it's facing away from us. So if this happens, we're back in the Stone Age. And then we know this happens from recent history. The sound so loud that it circled the Earth 4 times. And this is like 539 AD. Civilization reset. All the people in this area of Krakatoa reset. But there were areas that were spared. This is what's a trip, is that, all of these things that we find where these cataclysms happen, we find areas that are spared, that for some reason they just, I don't know, they missed the destruction. It's just like, kind of like in Lahaina there, where only certain people's houses burned and others didn't.
Yeah, I'm going to say a couple of things. Like the cosmic rays would definitely cause some mutations in genes. But the Krakatoa thing has always been fascinating for me. Is they say, yeah, that sound went around the Earth 5 times, but you had survivors that were within 20 to 30 miles of that. So I just don't understand how everybody's eardrums were not completely ruptured and their eyes literally vibrated out of their sockets for 1,000 miles in any direction of that blast. So if you're saying that it was heard 5 times around the world, like the shockwave heard around and people heard it, because, even concussion blasts, when you look at some of these, bunker busters heading into these buildings, I mean, that concussion wave is incredibly loud. Like if you were anywhere close to that, you would have your eardrums ruptured in a second. Now, now they're talking about something that's so loud you could have heard that sound across the planet. So again, some of these things you got to pull it back for a second. I mean, how can you tell me that many people, even the survivors, the British that were close to Krakatoa, just all were able to just live through this, and they didn't have all of their senses completely annihilated in terms of vibration coming off of that shock wave? The blast pattern and the blast itself, like I say, would have ruptured an enormous amount of eye sockets and eardrums, but it just didn't. So I'm thinking about, no, wait, so modern, physics changed back on that eruption?
I'm sorry, what was that? I was reading the comments. Or did you cut out? Hello? Am I alone in here? I'm scared. I think he got cut off. That must have been what happened. Anyway, look at those footprints.
Yeah, Deep Purple, you
years.
there, man?
There you are. All right. Now, what were you saying?
I dropped off there for a second. My sound went up into the atmosphere. Yeah, you got to think about the Hunga Tonga eruption. They said the same thing. Did people really hear it? They heard a slow, low vibration sort of up in Alaska, or was that just the shock wave that went around the planet that was visible, measurable with our seismic stations? To send a sound wave around the planet, and you're talking something that's so extraordinary that I can't believe more humans were not wiped out just from that concussion wave. I just am baffled at times. So, Ransom, I sent you a couple more images here. If you could take a look over into your Skype. This is the real deal stuff that I'm talking about. And the one I would like you to put up first, if you could, is the Tree of Life alignment, which goes right into where we are talking about on the planet right this second. Because when you look at the Tree of Life or the Kabbalah, it has a very geometric configuration to it, talking about the upper soul, the human spirit, the sense of self, the soul's life force, the ego, the reason and logic, love and passion. When you look at the 4 gas giants that are in their alignment, October 23rd of 2024, and where the Earth will sit in the middle, again, on the geocentric, with the sun and Venus down to the right of us. It takes on the formation of 7 of the bodies in space of the 9, or I should say the 10, including the sun, on the tree of life at that day. So for me, that's the marking in the beginning of the cycle. Something so significant that the tree of life was marking this celestial alignment. There shall be signs in the heavens. I've said it before, the wise men followed that star for months. Well, this celestial alignment, the squaring, will be in our sky for a year. Actually longer by the time we come in and out. So yeah, the next 6 months, it'll really start to get the square configuration where it'll be very noticeable. Now, one thing that's an unknown moving into this, since you talked about the potentiality there, will the planet start to glow brighter? That's one thing that's an unknown with the electromagnetism shifting and the possibility of, like you said, cavitation effects or movements of when there is, think about these gas giants as either funneling a current or allowing it to connect into a higher discharge cable outbound through the solar system. Allowing more of that Berkey current to flow through the star, because generally these gas giants are going to be, in many different places all around our, 360 degrees of arc. So as the current flow coming into our star would generally hit and then be diffused across all these gas giants with the different magnetic fields across all the different parts of our solar system, and it would be a diffusion effect. Now everything is going to be funneled into one single electromagnetic spot in our solar system through the sun. And as we look at this tree of life and what we see coming up with this squaring of the gas giants, that's really is, there's something very significant here. And I'm trying to find the end of the cycle, because for me, this very much marks the beginning of it. So as above, so below. We would have to then invert and reverse. So you would have to take the solar system and turn it upside down and have the have the sun in the exact same spot. And then we would have to move the planets around in their orbits until we completed that with the 4 gas giants moving around, where it looks like Mars would have to be off over where, Mercury would, excuse me. Mercury and Mars would have to be over on their left side. But in that orbit, Mars is in the right place. It's just Mercury. So there'd have to be 2 planets further below on the sun on the second turning to complete the cycle. Now, when is that? The best I can find somewhere is around 2033 in the completion of that cycle. Now, if anybody else knows the date that they found with a more geometric, precise alignment, I would love to see it. But so far, man, I don't know how you interpret this, but with all these things that have gone on this week, and then seeing this sign and matching up with the thing that is directly correlated with that religion and in Judaism right there with the tree of life and the Kabbalah and the mystics and the mystic schools, and talking about signs in the heavens, and then we see the exact match for this. I don't know, man. It's a little bit baffling for me to try to put it out there as coincidence, or it's not related, or you're just seeing something in the heavens that, because the elite and this sort of powered, moneyed crew, their timeline is the stars. Don't delude yourself if you think that they don't understand what's going on out there. And this astrological event coming on Saturday, this solar eclipse, it's a ring of fire. And most interesting for the United States, it will be as its max darkness over Corpus Christi, Texas. Now, Corpus Christi, you could interpret that into Christ. And also Mercury will be visible as a star in the day sky when this occurs. Now you can think about all these equinoxes and solstice and, the different cycles of moving into, whether it's the north node or the south node or whatever it is. Pluto's in its return for the United States, which means the destruction. When you look at these, when they set up the United States, Pluto was returning also for the beginning of our cycle. I mean, there's so many. They look at the heavens. They only understand the energetics of the solar system and the wider galactic arm. That Berkey current, they understand the flows. They understand the flows in. That's why they're so heavy into the astrology. Well, you need to understand the astronomy to know where we sit in the heavens, like literally the place of the heavens. Once you get that and you understand the actual location of it, then you can start to map out the energetics. So like you said, those handprints you looked at some 250,000 or 220,000 years ago, was there somebody there taking record of the heavens and the energetic changes of that? Because if we're talking about the Great Year, and that's only 25,000 years, and we're going back 250,000 years, we've gone through 10 cycles of this, at least since those handprints you're talking about in Tibet. This is the true time clock. And I think we have struck midnight on this one, because that tree of life alignment explains nothing else except why it is happening now. So I don't know, Ransom, what do you think with the assessment of that?
I wouldn't put it past people, because I was talking about the connection to astrology. So that anybody that's into astrology is paying attention to the position of the planets, and they have been. We know for at least, like you said, we have the precession of the equinox cycle that was handed down from somebody in antiquity, and we know it has to be about 52,000 years. That at least that they were paying attention to notice that it changes every 26 and then repeats the cycle in 50. So you would think that at least 52,000 years they've been looking at the stars, paying attention to where they move, the planets, etc. And I remember a few years ago when you were first showing me that alignment, and that's all I could think about as soon as you showed it to me was that I remember I always forgot what it was called, but it looked just like that to me. And actually there is, I believe, a correlation, right, of each one of those dots on the tree of life to a specific body in the solar system. So that is trippy. I think that this whole cycle is based on something more natural, that they know this is just going to happen. I mean, just like us, we're paying attention to these cycles. Well, they are paying attention, but they are cheating in the way that they have ancient records, ancient documents, ancient knowledge to base their clock on. And we don't have that because it's been stolen away multiple times throughout history, even though some people were smart and they wrote it down and it's hidden in books. That's why you hear about, Moses getting mad about the golden calf down there, because the time of Taurus was ending and the time of Aries was beginning. That's the same reason that Jesus and the time of Jesus is represented by two fish, because it's Pisces. It's the time of Pisces. Jesus warned about the water bearer. And other religions around the world timed this about the same time to the time of Aquarius. So we know human beings paid attention to this clock, this cycle, and for whatever reason, catastrophe strikes in between or maybe even aligned with some of these cycles. And the elite know that. They also know that, they have the best scientific knowledge of the entire picture we're looking at. So, we get bits and pieces. We have to do research. There are people in the world that probably get informed at every little discovery so they could update their plethora of knowledge that's not shared with the public, because power is knowledge and knowledge is power. And that's actually the currency that's being used. So when they have a great reset, and like I always tell people, they didn't do it for oil. They didn't do it for money. They make the money. They tell people where and when they're going to pump the oil. And it kind of boils down to the fact that they just know that you need the money So they print it and they control everybody based on this. And they always have ever since they switched over the metal of gold basically into a paper system. Because prior to that, we know around the world, you couldn't own really gold too much as a private citizen. It ended up in the empire. The king got it. So throughout time, no matter which civilization you pick, they were collecting gold and they were saving it and they were putting it all in one spot. I don't know why it seems inherent in human history, but we know there are gold mines in Africa that are at least, 100,000 years old or more. So there's been all kinds of things going on for probably well over 200,000 years. It's agreed that Neanderthal man lived in Europe for 450,000 years. And now we're putting ourselves back into the mythological time of when the Sumerians say these Anunnaki people were doing things here and there. Now, I don't know whether or not they were aliens or they were, some kind of interdimensional being, or whether or not they were just a different kind of hominid that seized opportunity from being a little bit advanced in knowledge and technology. Whatever the case, it's about time for a reset, and I think nature's going to help out. But the governments of the world obviously are planning for a major change. That's why they're using old terms like that war to end all wars. And if you remember, obviously it wasn't the war to end all wars, because we just did it again in a few decades. And then we had, we keep doing it, proxy war. They want to drag everybody into it. And what you were saying before about like a program, it could be nothing, none of that woo-woo stuff. It could be not aliens. It couldn't be demons or interdimensional beings. It could be just simply the fact that there are a large amount of elite people that track their ancestry back to different cults that enjoy human sacrifice and ritualistic sacrifice. And they like to make the whole world participate in it. And I bring you to another tower, like the Tower of Babel, or actually rather 3 towers that fell in the New Babylon. And that's New York City, the center of trade. And ironic that Columbia, which had previous incarnations of different names, was there to witness the fall of said towers that represented the world. Remember, they were the World Trade Centers. So like the Tower of Babel, it represented the peoples of the earth and the factions of the earth. And indeed, we are again where there is one universal language around the world, and that is computer binary code and programming. No matter what country you live in, this is the same, whether it's Chinese, Korean, whoever's doing it, Russians, Americans, etc. We now have one language, and that's the computer language. And that brings me to my last point. I'm searching my house all week for this paper that I had from the Theosophic Society from 1920, which was a paper about whether or not the universe is a simulation. And in there, they have words that make it sound like they knew about computers in the computing age in 1920. And remember, the Theosophical Society was into the occult, connected to Madame Blavatsky and what's his name, the weird guy, Crowley. All of those, we're sitting around thinking of these different ways to use sigils and mathematics, sacred geometry and history. But they were on the low-level rungs of it, I think. They weren't getting the clear history, and that's why they get into this weird occult. But here we are in the future, and now we're asking the same question. This is from physics.org. Could a new law of physics support the idea we're living in a computer simulation? I didn't need a new law because everywhere we look in the universe, you find math, and math is it's a concept not only we can think about in more ways, but it's fundamental for the universe because we find it everywhere. There's pi, there's chi, there's these repeating numbers that happen, these unchangeable numbers, these constants. So what we see is some kind of mathematical computer code in the universe. Now, to me, that doesn't really mean we're a simulation, but it does mean to me that there was a creator with a program. And I think what's going on right now are these little pathetic beings on Earth, most likely, are trying to manipulate the program because we're at a point in technology and knowledge where they've discovered the code. So they want to tamper with said code, from genetics to the fundamental laws of the universe. And that's where we are today.
Yeah, and once we're into this change, and it's noticeable that our waking reality and the veil of reality is changing and morphing in front of us. I wonder if this change will be disguised and hindered and hidden by global war as we march into this magnetic field anomaly. Because I really believe those are related, that when we come through this magnetic field, there's going to be an awareness and an awakening across all of humanity, whatever form that takes. But unanimously, we are going to pierce the veil of either control, or we'll start to literally see the workings of the heavens in front of us, where you'll see the gears and the cogs of that machinery in front of us. And it'll shift everybody's reality to the point where they will see the workings of the heavens. They will see the workings of our universe. The mathematic formula will be there for everybody to see as the numbers are moving, morphing, the gears are twisting amongst themselves, but not in ways set in iron that we have. It'll be multi-dimensional movement that people will notice and see that there is complexity behind us, behind it. But the best way to obfuscate or hide that from the eyes would be a war. Keep you in fear so you don't see what you see in front of you and try to disguise it as something else. Thanks for listening. Peace be on you. David DuByne, Ransom Godwin signing off. We'll see you next week. Many Ice Age Conversations. Bye for now. Sign up for the newsletter, oilseacrop.org.
Imagine, if you will, a glimpse into the possible outcome of a million mistakes. What you are about to watch is a nightmare. It is not meant to be prophetic. It need not happen. It's the fervent and urgent prayer of all men of goodwill that it never shall happen. But in this place, in this moment, it does happen. In the midst of it comes unexpectedly over the phone the announcement of the President of the United States, the warning from the very top declaring a state of emergency of suspected enemy missiles approaching. It's anyone's guess where they might land. What city will be obliterated? How many could be lost? And last but not least, will it be me? Will it be my family, friends, my square inch on the map? Minutes go by and nothing. Right as you exhale a breath of relief, an instant wave of horror treks down your spine and a sinking feeling in the pits of your stomach. Just then the power goes out. The only light you see is the glow of your phone. Shining in your face, the icons of terror. Low battery, and even more frightening, the symbol for connection to information and loved ones gone. You try the landline in your office, desperate to contact family. Nothing at all, just a bone-chilling empty silence. Panic-stricken, you blindly forage for your car keys. Success. Something in this nightmare of a day has gone right. Now it's a desperate mad dash for your car. Your mind now in a near intellectual paralysis. Logic a struggle as you cope with a Gatling gun barrage of horrific ideas of what your family might be going through in this very moment. Miraculously, your car starts and you begin your seemingly apocalyptic drive to locate your kin. As you pass the first stop sign, the sight of civic decay is already bearing its nasty head as you speed past fights in the streets, looting, and a complete halt of any semblance of an evolved civilization. To your right, a large fire. As angry, fear-filled citizens with their arms full of grocery items run from what used to be your local food market, ran by a mom and pops couple, now collapses into a bonfire of dreams. Because of the commotion, your attention span has been stolen. Now before your automobile is a violent crowd. They have now surrounded your car, banging on the metal, bashing at the glass, screaming incoherently. What just a second ago was the road to salvation, now a deadly trap of circumstance and fear blocking your escape. This can't be happening, repeatedly echoing in your head as you start to mumble the phrase in a shrieking, inaudible, childlike tone to yourself. The trepidation now filling your lungs like a poison fog, suffocating and smothering in its certainty. Just then, as your heart and soul seem to be having synergistic perturbations, an alarm blares, overwhelming your senses. Immediately you recall the warning of missiles. You close your eyes and expect the end. But the alarm morphs into a sweet, familiar beckoning of your alarm clock. You open your eyes and switch off the welcoming timepiece. A warm filling of relief as you realize your family is safe in their beds, and no pending doom is written in the stars today. For a split second, you ponder the poor people of your vision, and it reinforces your confidence that you have already prepared for the any scenario. You have peace of mind your children will eat and thrive, because you invested in their future to give some stability if any break in the normality of life happens. You invested in Heaven's Harvest. The you in this story was a fictional you. But do you get the feeling something unthinkable is going to happen soon? I sure do. The problem is we probably won't see it coming. One morning you'll wake up and the world will be a much different place. Don't panic, prepare. Smart folks are investing in emergency food now. A wise man once said, "It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it." Heaven's Harvest is the nation's leader in emergency food storage. It's the only investment you get 100% of your money for, even better than gold. Survival experts recommend the 3-month emergency food kit. Go to heavensharvest.com, use the code ADAPT at checkout and save a mind-blowing 50